U.S. President Barack Obama announced an open-ended bombing campaign against Islamic State militants on Wednesday that will extend into Syria for the first time. So far, the U.S. military has launched 154 airstrikes in Iraq and deployed more than 1,100 troops and, quote, advisors in what it calls non-combat roles. Mr. Obama says he'll send an additional 475 service members to Iraq and ask Congress to authorize U.S. military personnel to train Syrians, Iraqis, and others to combat Islamist militants in both countries. Saudi Arabia has agreed to host and help fund the training program as part of a coalition of European and Arab nations participating in this latest effort to defeat ISIL. Later, we'll get reaction from Iraq's former national security advisor. But first, the fight against Islamic State also means a fight against Western Muslims who've signed up with the terrorist group. Americans and Europeans are among the many foreigners who are now on the ground fighting in Syria and northern Iraq. CCTV's Hendrik Sybrandy takes a look at why people living fairly normal lives in the West are drawn to these kinds of extremist groups.
How can you say this is suicide? There's nothing to suicide.
Those were some of American-born moaner Mohammed Abu Salah's final words before he drove a truck packed with explosives into a Syrian restaurant. Douglas MacArthur McCain of Chicago was killed recently while fighting for the militant group Islamic State. And 19-year-old Shannon Conley of Colorado was recently arrested, accused of trying to help Islamic State, also known as ISIS. There are three of a number of Westerners who've been linked to terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq just this year.
I must say my reaction was, this is pretty typical. You have something like ISIS, which is really swept across Western Iraq like some medieval horde or something. So this is exciting to some people.
Terrorism experts now estimate about 2,000 Europeans have joined Syrian rebel fighting groups during the past 3 years, along with at least 100 Americans.
I think we should be worried, I don't think we need to over-exaggerate the problem, but I think there is cause for concern.
The head of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver says radical groups that fight corrupt and brutal dictators and score victories on the battlefield hold a certain appeal for some in the West.
And ISIS sort of provides this sort of narrative of we're going back to the sort of basic, early, pristine, romanticized, pure days of Islamic rule.
That narrative can be a magnet for some young people who have a void in their lives and are seeking a sense of belonging and identity.
It's the same thing we study with gang research, that people may have a lack of social ties or bonds that are connecting them to whatever their stereotypical culture would be.
Social media helps groups recruit women who, because they're seen as vulnerable and compassionate, are considered easier targets.
And so just as marketers do for us to sell us things, terrorist organizations could be utilizing those same tools, those same methods to find the demographics they're looking for.
Westerners who join Islamic State join an organization that's become infamous in the past year for its beheadings of U.S. journalists at the hands of a man suspected of being a British national, along with its brutality against, among others, the Kurds of Iraq.
There should be a big scale of reaction to stop that violence. Being sorry or compassionate is not enough. There has to be an action to stop all that violence against innocent people.
Of course, what worries many is the prospect of those Western passport holders returning to their homelands with terrorist skills they learned overseas.
And being able to recruit others and sort of embedding themselves in some kind of network.
Former Ambassador to Iraq Christopher Hill says while that's a real concern, he believes the U.S. in particular has gotten much better at detecting terrorist plots in recent years.
I have a lot of confidence in our security services in this country. I think they do a lot to keep us safe. They will have challenges with some of these people. I am sure they are up to those challenges.
We are an Islamic army.
Groups like Islamic State have an international face that makes this terrorist threat a little less foreign, a bit more personal than what we've encountered before.
I think we have to be as vigilant as ever.
Hendrik Sybrandy, CCTV, Denver.